What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, we got some very, very interesting news to talk about. As undefeated WBC lightweight world champion superstar boxer Devin the Dream Haney, 27 wins, no losses, no draws, 15 wins by way of knockout, 5'8" with a 72-inch arm reach. Devin Haney and his father, trainer and manager Bill Haney, and DHP Promotions, they're looking to secure a fight against newly crowned unified lightweight world champion superstar boxer out of Australia, George Kambosos Jr. 20 wins, no losses, no draws, 10 wins by way of knockout. George Kambosos Jr. is 28 years of age, 5'9.5" with a 70-inch arm reach. With that said, they're looking to secure a fight with George Kambosos Jr. They're going to every measures to secure the fight with George Kambosos Jr. They're willing to oblige George Kambosos Jr. with whatever demands he wants. He wants to have the fight take place in Australia. They're willing to go and oblige him and go to Australia. They just want to make the undisputed match and secure their legacy. They are already very successful as far as revenue goes, okay? Devin Haney is the second highest grosser from junior welterweight on down, only behind undefeated 3-division world champion, superstar boxer Gervonta Tank Davis, who's with Floyd Mayweather Promotions and Leonard Ellerbe. Okay, Gervonta Tank Davis is a pay-per-view star. So with that said, he's a champion at 130, 135, and 140, and he's viewed as the highest grosser and the biggest star from junior welterweight on down, followed only by Devin Haney, okay, who by far makes more money than any of the other superstars in the lightweight division, junior lightweight division, junior welterweight division, for that matter. By far, Devin Haney's the biggest grosser. So from junior welterweight on down, Devin Haney is only second to that of Gervonta Tank Davis. With that said, George Kambosos Jr. is looking to get the biggest payday of his career. Initially, George Kambosos Jr., he stated it was about legacy and putting on the best fights as far as entertainment goes for the fans. George Kambosos Jr. has since changed his tune, and now he's telling Devin Haney that he needs to part ways with some of his belongings if he wants to be able to pay the purse to stage the fight for George Kambosos Jr. So George Kambosos Jr. is now looking to get as much revenue from Devin Haney as possible. But Devin Haney, he's with obviously his father, trainer, and manager Bill Haney, but he's also with Matchroom CEO and promoter Eddie Hearn and DAZN. Okay, so they're willing to come up with the number that he's seeking out to make the fight happen. Okay, so with that said, it's not going to be a problem getting him the purse. The problem is getting him to agree. So obviously, Bill, he did an interview with my brother Champside, and while he doing the interview with the brother Champside asked Bill, if you're unable to secure the fight that you guys are looking for with George Kambosos Jr., what's going to be the next step? Okay, what's the plan B? Now, keep in mind, I had the older brother of 3 great fighters, a bloodline of fighters in the Russell family, okay? Gary Russell Jr., Gary Antuanne Russell, and you have Gary Antonio Russell, okay? And so I had Batman on my show, the great brother Batman on the show, and he stated, because keep in mind, Gary Russell, who was the longest reigning champion in the sport of boxing, the WBC featherweight champion, only one blemish on his resume that came at the hands of Olympic 2-time gold medalist, 3-division world champion, former unified lightweight world champion, superstar boxer Vasil High-Tech Lomachenko out of the Ukraine. Gary Russell and Devin Haney and Bill Haney, they entered negotiations to stage a future fight between, well, an immediate fight at the time between Devin Haney and Gary Russell Jr., who Gary Russell, he stated he wanted to come up. He was willing to come up as high as welterweight to challenge the 3-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, who was currently the WBO reigning welterweight world champion and widely considered by many to be the #1 best pound-for-pound fighter in the world in Terrence Bud Crawford. Okay, he would go as high as 147 and challenge Terrence Crawford, and he stated it was personal. So when Devin Haney and Bill Haney heard that, they were looking and seeking out the best opponent possible, which came in the form of Gary Russell Jr. So they reached out to Gary Russell Jr. He stated he was willing to take $1.5 million to face off against Terrence Crawford. They stated they were willing to oblige him and stage a fight, and they would give him $1.5 million. Now you got to keep in mind, Gary Russell Jr., he just lost his title to Mark Maceo, okay, in which it's reported that Gary Russell, he only earned $500,000 for the fight against Mark Maceo, okay? So that's 3 times, 4 times less the amount he would have got to fight Devin Haney. Nonetheless, the fight never come to fruition because Gary Russell, he stated he didn't like the wording in the contract. He felt like it could have been, some things that favored him or some things he wasn't in favor of. And he stated he was going to send back a contract back in return, a counter contract. But he never did that. And so the fight never came to fruition. So, obviously, Devin Haney was willing to fight. Gary Russell had stated he was going to dominate Devin Haney because he was too young, too green, and not ready. Too small, right? So, obviously, competitive nature between two camps, between two fighters, Devin Haney and Gary Russell, there's going to be words exchanged. So, when Gary Russell was heading into his fight with Mark Maceo, his title defense, his 6th title defense, okay, Gary Russell, he stated that, Mark Maceo was a bum, okay, he wasn't a good fighter. And so after he lost the fight, now, obviously he suffered an injury in the fight. In the 4th round, he injured his shoulder, wasn't unable to use his right arm in the fight. So he suffered an injury in the fight, but nonetheless, he lost the fight. So after the fight was over, Devin Haney, he tweeted out to Gary Russell that, Mr. Cap, meaning that, he was claiming that he wanted to fight with Devin Haney, but never made a counter offer, never agreed to actually fight Devin Haney. So he's calling him Mr. Cap. And he said that Mr. Cap just lost his belts to a guy he considered to be a bum, not a good fighter, okay? And so that didn't sit well with Gary Antuanne Russell, who is the junior welterweight, okay? He fights at 140, okay? And so I had Batman, the brother of the older brother of the Russells, and Batman, he stated that after those comments, Gary Antuanne Russell, he saw the tweet, he heard the comments, and that he knew that Devin Haney would soon be at junior welterweight, okay? It's not a hidden secret that Devin Haney lets the world know he's on a fight-by-fight basis at 135 because he's simply at 23 years of age. He's outgrowing the division, but he's looking to accomplish what he's looking to accomplish in the division, okay? And so with that said, Gary Antuanne Russell, he knows this, and he stated that, according to Batman, that, he wanted to face off against Devin Haney, okay? And so Batman let it be known on my show that, if Devin Haney moves up after those comments, and Gary Antuanne Russell, he wants to fight, okay? And so with that said, it started to gain traction because the word got back, obviously, to Devin Haney and Bill Haney that Gary Antuanne Russell was looking to fight Devin Haney. Okay, so Bill Haney, when he was on champ side, now I done gave you the backstory. So when Bill Haney was on champ side and he was asked what's plan B, he said plan B, if he's available, is going to be Gary Antuanne Russell. If we can't secure the fight with George Kambosos Jr. For Undisputed, plan B is going to be Gary Antuanne Russell, since he say he wanted, okay? And they're willing to oblige. Well, Gary Antuanne Russell, he got word of this, and he responded, and he said that he was knocking Devin Haney out, okay? Once Devin Haney comes up, and he's willing to accept the fight and oblige Devin Haney, and he's going to knock Devin Haney out. Well, Bill Haney, Devin Haney, they called their bluff and said, okay, are you available to fight next? Can we start to begin the negotiations and take this back to the zone and take this back to Eddie Hearn and say that Gary Antuanne Russell is available should Devin Haney not be able to secure the fight with George Kambosos Jr.? Well, that was met with a big no. Now, keep in mind, Antuanne Russell, he stated that he was going to knock out Devin Haney. But now they're not available. They won't be available. They have a fight coming up with Victor Postol, former junior welterweight world champion. That's scheduled to take place February 26th. So now their plan is to secure the belts, at least one belt, the WBA belt, before they go into a fight with Devin Haney. So now that means that Devin Haney is willing to fight next, but they will not be available next to be able to stage a fight with Devin Haney, okay? So this means it was all for nothing, okay? At the end of the day, you got to look at it and you got to say that it was all for nothing, okay? Because he's going to travel the path that he was already set to travel, which is the path of seeking out a belt, a title opportunity, okay? Another thing to keep in mind is that PBC, Premier Boxing Champions, in which Gary Russell Jr. Competes at, and so does Gary Antonio Russell and Gary Antuanne Russell. They all compete on the PBC with founder and advisor Al Heyman, who seemingly has no interest in dealing with Bill Haney, Devin Haney, DHP, okay? So that was a big part of the reason why Gary Russell and Devin Haney didn't come to fruition, okay? And so it came to me and it hit me, and I thought about it, right? If Al Heyman and the PBC were uninterested in doing business for Gary Russell to face Devin Haney, okay, then why would they be interested in the business of allowing? Now, Gary Russell is 33 years of age, okay? His career is much shorter than Gary Antuanne Russell, who's 25. He's 8 years younger than him, okay? So if the PBC wasn't willing to oblige them and allow Devin Haney to fight with Gary Russell Jr., then why would they be in the business of allowing a younger fighter whose future is promising and very bright in Gary Antuanne Russell to compete against Devin Haney? That wouldn't make sense, because the business is still the same, okay? You still have Devin Haney, who is still his own promoter with DHP Promotions, and you still have Gary Antuanne Russell, who is with PBC. So it's still the same business partner. So if those business partners were unwilling to stage a fight with Gary Russell Jr., then why would they be in the business of staging a fight for Gary Antuanne Russell, who Gary Antuanne Russell, again, this is no slight to Gary Russell Jr., but Gary Russell Jr. is 33 going on 34. Gary Antuanne Russell is 25. So the future, you have a longer and younger fighter whose future, Gary Russell Jr. is molding his legacy right now, okay? Gary Antuanne Russell's story has been unwritten, okay? Gary Antuanne Russell has a long way to go. So why would you risk Gary Antuanne Russell's career with Devin Haney, DHP Promotions, but you wasn't willing to risk it with Gary Russell Jr., okay? That just doesn't add up, and it just doesn't make good business sense, okay? So with that said, I think that, they were putting the carriage before the horse, okay? And in this situation, in this case, Gary Antuanne Russell, as the fighter, I'm sure he was willing to take the fight. But on the business side, his team can't produce the fight because he won't be ready. So Batman, Gary Russell, brother, he stated that they will be ready hopefully they'll be ready by the time Devin Haney comes up to junior welterweight. Well, that can't be the case, because Devin Haney's ready to come up to junior welterweight in the next fight. So Gary Antuanne Russell is fighting Victor Postol in his next fight, February 26th. That's not a title fight. So if they're looking to secure a title before they fight Devin Haney, well, then that means they're not going to be heading into a fight with Devin Haney until at least 2023, because Josh Taylor, the undisputed junior welterweight right now in the world, British superstar boxer, he has a fight coming up February 26th as well against Jack Cottrell, his mandatory. Now, if Jack Cottrell beats Josh Taylor, then they have a 2-fight deal. Josh Taylor, did you hear what I just said? He's the undisputed champ, so he holds all the belts. He holds all the marbles. So just like Devin Haney is attempting to become undisputed at lightweight, create his legacy there, and then move up. So he can accomplish that in May. Then he'll be ready to come up. Once he beats George Kambosos Jr., he'll be ready to come up this summer and compete. And since that Antuanne Russell is not a champion, he could compete and make his debut, since they said that Antuanne Russell was ready to welcome Devin Haney into the junior welterweight division. Well, that's not a title fight. So Devin Haney could look to fight Antuanne Russell, which shouldn't be difficult to make because it's not big money that you have to pay out, because he's not an accomplished superstar. So essentially, Devin Haney brings everything to the table. Antuanne Russell, essentially, he's not a world champion. He's 14 fights, 14 wins, no losses, no draws, 14 wins by way of knockout, 25 years of age, 5'10" with a 69-inch arm reach. Okay, so he only has 14 fights. Now, he's not a world champion, so Devin Haney is going to bring more to the table. He's going to be the clear A side. He's a bigger superstar. He's an accomplished superstar. He'll be the undisputed champion and going into the fight. So essentially, he'll just be giving Antuanne Russell an opportunity to make a name for himself. Whereas Devin Haney is in a lose-lose situation. He loses, well, he just loses. Okay? Well, people are going to say he was exposed. If he wins, Antuanne Russell, well, he was too green. You understand? So although Antuanne Russell is older, 2 years older than Devin Haney. Devin Haney has been in a professional longer, okay, and more accomplished. So with that said, you have to wait till Josh Taylor loses to Jack Cottrell, okay, they're going to have a rematch clause. So until unless Josh Taylor beats Jack Cottrell, then he vacates the belt. Then the belts will come available. Then you're talking about Antuanne Russell, who's fighting Victor Posto in the WBC rankings, not in the WBA, but they're claiming that they're going after the WBA title. So that means you're going to have to wait, and you're possibly going to have to fight Victor Posto. Then you're going to possibly have to fight an eliminator. Then you're possibly going to have to fight for a vacant WBA title. So unless you're fighting Devin Haney for the vacant WBA title, you're talking about fighting Devin Haney in 2023. So it's just not going to be doable anywhere in the foreseeable future. So I believe that they will put in the carriage before the horse. And another major roadblock in this is PBC going to be willing to do business with DHP and Eddie Hearn and Mattrell? Because if they're not willing to do that, then it's all for nothing. So let's see how this unfolds. Hopefully Devin Haney gets the fight with George Kambosos Jr. first things first. And hopefully Antuanne Russell, he beats Victor Posto, as I expect both guys to be successful. So let's see how this unfolds and plays out. But at the end of the day, it sounds good to say that Antuanne Russell is going to knock out Devin Haney. And that fight is started to gain traction. And the fans are starting to get excited. But I'm here to tell the fans to pump the brakes, because it's not going to happen anytime soon. So it may not never happen, because the PBC may not do business with DHP. And why would Devin Haney give up his stance and his advantages, being his own promoter? He will never do that. So let's see how this unfolds and plays out. But that's all I got for y'all. Make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.